Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I am Paradoxus Alpha, and I've been practicing Thelemic ceremonial magic for 3 decades. This talk is about a fundamental ritual of the Thelemic canon, but one where my idiosyncrasies as a magician will be evident. Although the Star Ruby was published as an official ritual of AA, it has also been prescribed for the general use of all Thelemites and practitioners of magic in the new eon. I am a withdrawn probationer of AA, and I claim no imprimatur nor official authority for this study of the topic. Remarks on their theoretical and practical merits alone, since I don't particularly care to define nor to defy any orthopraxy with respect to this ritual. My discussion here will draw on my personal practice, which includes elaborations beyond the canonical ritual, but I will take some care to distinguish these with flags like "I often" or "one might." The ritual of the Flaming Star, as here discussed, takes as its basis the version published in the Book of Lies, falsely so called, composed in a time near to the origins of the Gnostic Mass, and using divine names which orient both to that Mass and to the prophet's visions of the 30 heirs. I prefer this original version to the one appended to magic and Therian practice, for being more clearly linked to both the creed of the Mass and the vision and the voice. It also more cleanly manifests the formula of Tetragrammaton. The later revision represents to me an unperfected transitional form, the genuine virtues of which are more effectively implemented in the distinct ritual of the Mark of the Beast, composed as Liber Reguli at about that time. Chapter 25 of the Book of Lies, the Star Ruby, provides the full ritual on a single page, as what Crowley later glossed to be a new and more elaborate version of the banishing ritual of the pentagram. Structurally, it resembles the old Golden Dawn Lesser Pentagram ritual, as Crowley had already exposed it in the Equinox. There are, however, some structural additions peculiar to the Star Ruby. One of the chief elaborations consists of opening and closing actions that emphasize and enhance the symmetrical quality of the original Lesser Pentagram ritual. For convenience, I refer to these small sections as the apotropeisms. I've also heard them called exorcisms. They consist chiefly of an injunction in Greek that is rhythmically similar to the formulae "Hekos, hekos esti bebeloi" and "Procul o procul esti profani," used to dismiss the uninitiated before commencing a ceremony, and they serve essentially the same function: a general dismissal of irrelevant and impertinent spirits. Next is the cross Kabbalistic, a Greek variation on the Kabbalistic cross used in the Lesser Pentagram ritual. The meaning of the original Hebrew, Ate Malkuth Vegebura Vegedula Leolam Amen, is "Unto thee be the kingdom and the power and the glory for the ages. Amen." This text, familiar to Protestants and some Eastern Christians as a closing doxology for the Lord's Prayer, has its original source in Jewish Hebrew liturgy, which is in turn probably rooted in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 11. "Yours, O Lord, are the glory and the power and the beauty and the victory and the splendor. For all that is in the heavens and on the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, and you are he who is exalted over everything as the leader." Magicians will note the Kabbalistic significance of this biblical verse, which calls out 6 Sephirot in sequence: the 4th, glory; 5th, power; 6th, beauty; 7th, victory; 8th, splendor; and 10th, kingdom. The references to the Sephirot of Tiferet, Netzach, and Hod are missing from the liturgical version and its magical adaptation in the Lesser Pentagram ritual, both of which substitute a cross for the simple descent of the Sephirot. In addition, The star ruby version replaces the kingdom at Malkut with the phallus, attributable to Yesod, and omits the liturgical invocation of Eonic time in favor of Iao, a formula of Tiferet. The names with which the pentagrams are established in the star ruby are entities corresponding to the components of the formula of Tetragrammaton, as described in Chapter 3 of Magic in Theory and Practice. Chaos is Yod, the father. Babylon, He, the mother. Eros is Vav, the son, and Psyche, He final, the daughter. Each of them is represented accordingly in the visions of Liber 418. Chaos in the 4th heir, Babylon in the 22nd, 15th, and 2nd heirs, Eros in the 5th, and Psyche in the 9th and 4th. The Chaos Babylon syzygy also occurs in the Creed of Liber 15 and in Chapter 11 of the Book of Lies. Although the identity is less than perfect, Chaos and Babylon bear comparison to Phanes and Nyx in Orphic cosmogony. A locus classicus for Eros and Psyche is the fable that stands as the centerpiece of the Metamorphoses of Apuleius, better known as the Golden Ass. And this couple has thus become subject matter for a wide range of profane artworks and mediations. An even earlier source, although with less vivid personification, is the Platonic dialogue Phaedrus, doubtless quite familiar to Frater Perdurabo, inasmuch as his paper Energized Enthusiasm, written at about the same time as the Star Ruby, is tacitly a commentary upon this writing of Plato. It is a curious fact that while the original Lesser Pentagram used 4 Hebrew names of 4 letters each, the Star Ruby violates this rule in precisely one instance, the name Babylon. Since this is a name of 7 letters, it may be that there is a secret name of 4, the 4 invisible to its 7 visible, a name which may not be spoken among men, to which the magician indirectly appeals in this invocation. The 4 differing styles of vocal production also reflect the formula of Tetragrammaton, analyzed into the elemental cherubs, that is, the 4 living creatures of Ezekiel and the Apocalypse, understood also as the fixed signs of the zodiac. The magician is to roar like a lion, Yod, the fiery Leo, to scream like an eagle, He, the watery Scorpio, to say like a man, Vav, the airy Aquarius, and to bellow like a bull, He final, the earthy Taurus. The later commentary of Frater Perdurabo notes that the pentagram has the red color of Geburah. In my own practice, I have added letters in the center of the pentagrams, based on the supersession of Yehovah by Chaos. The letters are individually colored, based on the astrological correspondences for the voices, and using the king scale for their paths. Note the way in which I have flipped the left-right direction of this table relative to those in previous slides, in order to show the proper superimposition of Yehovah and Chaos in the top 2 rows. In discussions of the change of circumambulatory direction in this part of the ritual from its lesser pentagram predecessor, it seems to have gone largely unremarked that it may be, in no small measure, a function of switching from right to left Hebrew to left to right Greek. In both ceremonies, the ritualist moves against the flow of the written language, suggesting a mystical aspiration to a source or origin. Note, therefore, that the name Chaos is consequently spelled in reverse by the letters that I use in my pentagrams. A paean is merely a song of praise or tribute, and the apparently simple paean, Iopan, following the establishment of the pentagrams in the star ruby, is one of the innovative elaborations that Frater Perdurabo added to the lesser pentagram ritual. In my practice, the paean is typically amplified with some possibilities for more elaborate verbiage, to which I will return later. The sequence of the NOx signs is taken from the star sapphire, chapter 36 of the Book of Lies, which is also their order in the progression through the grades of AA. This differs from the much later Liber 5, where they are correlated to the names at the quarters of that ritual. The long Greek passage that follows the paean is an evocation of 4 orders of beings from the Chaldean oracles. Golden Dawn adept W. Wynne Westcott had edited a translation of this pseudo-Zoroastrian Neoplatonic mystery text, and it also served as a source for several invocations in the Golden Dawn rituals. According to Westcott's scheme of the metaphysics of the oracles, the 3 orders of Yunges, Sinoches, and Teletarchai were intelligibles and intellectuals in the Empyrean world, comprehended by the second mind. The oracles further point to a class of pure daimons, which are the divinized souls of men. See number 91 in the Westcott edition. The concept is similar to the Augoiades, or Holy Guardian Angel. Thus, the daimones are those humans who are in conscious possession of their particular genii. These 4 orders, Yunges, Sinoches, Teletarchai, and daimones, are assigned by the star ruby to the 4 quarters, and thus this segment of the ritual parallels the establishment of the 4 pentagrams. However, the pentagrams in the first half of the ritual are established in a counterclockwise rotation, a circle, while the 4 Chaldean orders are set out on latitudinal and longitudinal axes, and thus a cross. Following the evocation of the 4 orders, there is another cross Kabbalistic and a final apotropeism, so that the first half of the ritual is mirrored neatly in the second half. Thus, from the outermost layer to the innermost, my approach to this ritual has a nested 5-fold structure as follows. The apotropeisms enclose the cross Kabbalistic, which brackets the pentagrams and guardians, which in turn surround the paean, which itself contains the ultimate act of magic with which this ceremony is concerned. The symmetrical nature of the ritual permits the ready condensation of the ceremony. For an experienced practitioner, the initial apotropeism alone, identical with the final one, includes and thus subsumes all of the material that falls between the two. So, in case of necessity, much of the effect of the entire ritual may be achieved through the apotropeism alone. A less radical abbreviation would take advantage of the manner in which the cross Kabbalistic surrounds and includes the work with the quarters and the paean. And thus, it would consist simply of the cross Kabbalistic, preceded and followed by apotropeisms. This structural symmetry is also the justification for opening up the center of the central section, that is the paean, to accommodate the elaborations which I will discuss in a few moments. These elaborations may be omitted, as they always are by those to whom they are unknown, on the same principle as the condensations just described. Now, I want to again address the 5 layers of the ritual with some details for each drawn from my experience with the ceremony. The first posture of the apotropeism is the sign of silence, which implies the assumption of the god form of Harpocrates. Most importantly, this procedure involves imagining oneself as a child. Recollection of the sense of one's body in childhood is crucially helpful. All verbal thought and internal dialogue should be stilled while holding this sign, and the operator may luxuriate in it for a minute or more. Note that this initial sign of silence also sets a psychic baseline or point of calibration for the similar signs that conclude the projection of each pentagram. When the words of the apotropeism are uttered, the God form is released, but the magician's subtle body should then have acquired an enhanced coherence and plasticity for the actions that follow. The great sweep of the hand backward and outward may be conceived as an arc, a segment of a circle, or an edge of a crescent, intended to complement symbolically the cruciform gesture which follows it. The cross Kabbalistic may benefit from various interesting practical considerations. The first, which I wish to share, is a particular form that may be assumed by the subtle body of the magician. The sacred Gynander, as in the image of the Baphomet of Mendes, according to Eliphas Levi's Rituel de la Haute Magie. With the word soy, the magician identifies the pentagram as a seal or mark on his own forehead, the symbol of intelligence under the influence of the supernal triad, represented by the torch and horns. O Fale is directed to the caduceus rising from the loins of the figure. Iskros and Eucharistos are the breasts, referring to the power and mercy with which the magician feeds his works. Finally, the two separated hands, solve and coagula, of the Gynander are brought together, so that in the name of Iao, the union of these two processes signals the ecstatic unfurling of the wings of the subtle body. Another, more pedestrian approach to the cross-Kabbalistic relies on color to help bring the Sephirotic relationships into visual realization. With soy, a silver-white light descends through the Ajna chakra, attributed to Chokmah per Liber 777, column 118. The colors of the other words follow from the Queen scale according to their Sephirotic attributions. Ofale is the purple foundation of an equilateral triangle where the upper corners, red Iskros and blue Eucharistos, are the primary colors which blend into it. The triangle is thus superimposed on a white cross, complementarily reminiscent of the altar implements in the Golden Dawn initiations, where the cross symbolizes mortality and the triangle divinity. In this case, however, the triangle is pointed downward, alluding to the deity Ra-Hor-Kuit through his particular symbol. The 3 and 4 of the triangle and cross also evoke mysterious energy, triform, mysterious matter in fourfold division, the alchemical tria prima, and the 4 classical elements. Finally, with Yao, the 3rd primary color is introduced, with a yellow beauty as Kentrum in Kentri Trigonum. To imagine the pentagrams may amount to a simplification of the lesser pentagram ritual if they are visualized entire rather than drawn dynamically in the air. However, it is possible that there is a distinct psychoactive value in the linear movement of the eyes that tends to accompany the manual inscription of a traditional banishing earth pentagram, which begins at the lower left point and proceeds clockwise. According to the quote-unquote accessing cues of some latter-day psychotechnicians, a typical person will rapidly access the following sequence of sensory channels as a result of the directions of the 5 lines of the pentagram: constructed visual imaging, kinesthetic feeling, recollected hearing, constructed interior hearing, and interior talking, thus bringing into play all the available sensory channels for mental processing. This effect, if desired, can be retained by simply visualizing the process of drawing the pentagram in the forehead before projecting it in the sign of the Enterer. The establishment of the 4 pentagrams may be undertaken in light of the practical application of the formula of Tetragrammaton discussed in Magic and Theory and Practice. The pentagram for chaos would then flame forth with a swift and violent creative energy. The one for Babylon would emerge like the irresistible force of a mighty river. The Eros pentagram would be expansive and penetrating, and the Psyche pentagram would form as a crystallization resplendent with interior light. Each of these different modes of manifestation can be engaged after the individual pentagram is first imagined in the forehead, as the process by which it comes to occupy that quarter of space. The paean is a prayer to Pan, which Crowley calls a generic name for truth. Standing at the point of knowledge, or dot, Pan is reflected in the inferior hebdomad and annihilated in the supernal triad. That supernal annihilation is the night of Pan, which can also be understood as the mutual reabsorption of the syzygies of creation in the apophatic ascent of the mystic. The reversed reflection of the comedy of Pan is the tragedy of man, where, viewed from the supernals, death and begetting are the supporters of the true cosmos. They are instead the oppressors of the ignorant microcosm below the veil of the abyss. All these ideas can be found published alongside the Star Ruby in the Book of Lies, chapters 0, 1, 11, and 34. My practice of the Star Ruby frequently expands the paean with this analysis of the keyword, derived from chapter 1 of the Book of Lies, and modeled on the analysis of the keyword INRI in the Golden Dawn Lesser Hexagram Ritual. It reads Pan as an acrostic, with Pi for Priapus, Alpha for Hades, and Nu for Nike. P-A-N, Pi, Alpha, Nu. Duality, energy, death. The pillars, Priapus, casting forth the seed. The pentagram, Hades, ruling the secret place. The scorpion, Nike, triumphant over death and life. Priapus, Hades, Nike, Pan, Eo Pan. N, the sign of the youth, fair and godly. O, the sign of the Lord, dark and beastly. The sign of the maiden, modest in desire. X, the sign of the lady, brazen in fulfillment. N, O, X, Nox, the night of Pan, Eo Pan. Thus my practice. The gods Priapus, Hades, and Nike correspond to the signs Puer, Weir, and Puella, which begin the NOX sequence. That sequence is then executed in its full form, culminating in the sign Mater Triumphans, and thus dramatizing the aspiration of the magician through the ranks of adeptship to the city of the pyramids, as well as the trances of the mystic in an ascent to plerimatic annihilation. In the correct form of this sequence, The masculine desire for union, coition, is transcended by the female desire for dissolution, parturition. See chapter 3 of the Book of Lies in this connection. Note, too, that a synthesis of the three gods in Pan once more creates Baphomet, whom Eliphas Levi also identified with Pan. In the merging of the three forms, we have the phallus of Priapus, the horns of Hades, and the wings of Nike. In this illustration of Pan from Athanasius Kircher's Obeliscus Pamphilius of 1650, we also see the two implements peculiar to Pan, his shepherd's crook and pipes, representing perhaps repulsion and attraction, will and love, right and left, the forces centrifugal and centripetal, male and female, whereby God creates and redeems. This last quote from Anna Kingsford's vision of Adonai. An alternative to analyzing the keyword Pan that I have also used is to recite the prologue of the unborn from the Holy Book, Liber 7. This passage may certainly help to instill the ecstasy that is desirable for this keystone of the ceremonial arch. Into my loneliness comes the sound of a flute in dim groves that haunt the uttermost hills. Even from the brave river they reach to the edge of the wilderness, and I behold Pan. The snows are eternal above, and their perfume smokes upward into the nostrils of the stars. But what have I to do with these? To me only the distant flute, the abiding vision of Pan. On all sides, Pan to the eye, to the ear, the perfume of Pan pervading, the taste of him utterly filling my mouth so that the tongue breaks forth into a weird and monstrous speech, the embrace of him intense on every center of pain and pleasure, the sixth interior sense of flame with the uttermost, inmost self of him. On all sides, myself flung down the precipice of being, even to the abyss, annihilation, an end to loneliness as to all. Pan, Pan, Eo Pan, Eo Pan. These suggestions for the pivot of the ceremony are entirely orthodox with respect to the ritual's goals and symbolic content, and they are effective in practice. But I admit they plainly exceed the instruction as written by Frater Perdurabo. As mentioned earlier, the telescoping symmetry of the ceremony permits such elaborations to be subsumed in any case. But one may argue easily that authorial intent was instead in keeping with the perspective and technique detailed in the 14th century Cloud of Unknowing. A man who prays like this prays with all the height and depth and length of his spirit. His prayer is high, for he prays in the full power of his spirit. It is deep, for he has gathered all his understanding into this one little word. It is long, for if this feeling could endure, he would go on crying out forever as he does now. It is wide, because with universal concern, he desires for everyone what he desires for himself. We must pray then with all the intensity of our being in its height and depth and length and breadth, and not with many words, but in a little word of one syllable. The anonymous author of the Cloud goes on to suggest for that one syllable either sin or God. But after its fashion, Pan covers both. The long Greek evocation of the guardians has customarily presented challenges to the imagination of practitioners of the star ruby. The Chaldean oracles themselves give very little detail on these entities, which are addressed in the fragmentary texts numbered 54 through 70 in the Westcott edition, and there seems to have been no other attempt to employ them in modern magic. It may actually have been Frater Perdurabo's plan that this extended incantation in a dead language should serve as a barbarous passage, the incomprehensibility of which would arouse the peculiar mental excitement required. But as in the case of the cross-Kabbalistic, I'd like to share two parallel ways I have used to conceptualize the evocation of the guardians, either of which can enrich the imagination in this phase of the ceremony. The first approach relies on the straightforward identification of the Jungis, Sinokes, and Teletarchai as the highest classes of metaphysical creatures in the Neoplatonic emanationism of the Chaldean oracles. It is simple enough to turn to the Neoplatonic hierarchies of Pseudo-Dionysus, where the highest orders of angels are conveniently inventoried: the seraphim, cherubim, and ophanim. Like the Jungis, the seraphim are fiery beings. Later revisions notwithstanding, the seraphim of ancient Hebrew lore were in original fact fiery serpents, which can also be identified with the radiant Knubis of the Gnostics, frequently referenced in Thelemic literature as the lion serpent. The Sinokes equate to the cherubim, representatives of divine authority taking the form of great sphinx-like composite creatures with multiple pairs of wings. The Teletarchai are then the ophanim, interlocking systems of wheels, brilliant with countless eyes, most famously recounted in the vision of Ezekiel. The daimon discussed earlier are those adepts who are possessed of their genii, and thus, as a transcendent class, they are equivalent to saints as understood by Christian and Islamic Neoplatonists. In keeping with traditional representations, such saints might be imagined as white-robed and crowned with light, halos or nimbuses. Note that this visual convention predates Christianity and was common in classical paganism. In order to conceive the guardians as classes rather than individuals, I picture 5 seraphic fire serpents, the key number of the pentagram ritual, for the Jungis. My Teletarchai are a group of 4 ophanim. For the Sinokes, I imagine a pair of cherubim, as on the Ark of the Covenant. And my daimones appear in a triad, like the triumvirate of the adepts. The particular daimones that I visualize most often in this manner are Pascal Beverly Randolph, Anna Kingsford, and Alistair Crowley. A different take on the guardians follows from the observation that the names of the orders seem to reflect offices or ceremonial roles in a classical mystery cult. The Jungis, from the name of a bird used in divination, might be oracles or soothsayers. The word Sinokes is sometimes read as constraints, and these could be the officers in charge of marshalling candidates and attendees. Teletarchai has the literal meaning of governors of initiatory rites, and these would be those who actually administered initiation. In this reading, the daimones would necessarily be the telites, or perfected ones, who had received full initiation. In the third column of this slide, I use the analogy between Freemasonry and the ancient mysteries to illustrate these roles. However, when I approach the ritual as an OTO initiate in these terms, it is with an understanding of the 4 classes of guardians as initiatory functions rather than temple personnel. I picture the Jungis as the words of the holy books cascading down before me like a shower of gems. The Teletarchai behind me are my initiators and their initiators, etc., reaching back in braided chains to the mists of antiquity. The Sinokes are emblematic personifications of my oaths on my right hand, and the daimones at my left are the members of the sanctuary of the Gnosis. who must veil their glory in a cloud of darkness. The evocation of the guardians concludes with an affirmation of the persistence of the 4 pentagrams that were established in the first half of the ceremony. In Crowley's instructions to students regarding the lesser pentagram ritual, as well as the Greek of this passage, we then see an acknowledgement of a pair of hexagrams above and below the ritualist, completing the enclosure in the 3rd dimension. Just as the set of 4 elements were symbolized in ancient Greece by the Pythagorean tetractys, which takes the form of a triangle, the combination of the 4 elemental pentagrams results in 4 equilateral triangles, one with a point in each cardinal direction. The east and west pointing triangles combine to form a hexagram underfoot, while the north and south pointing triangles combine to form one overhead. The color of these hexagrams should be the solar gold of Tiferet, just as the pentagrams have the martial red of Geburah. And I add a central letter, as I did for the pentagrams. The letters are midnight blue for Nuit above, and emerald green for Hadit below, and each is a Tau, as shown in the double triangle of Solomon, which we see here as it appears in the 2nd chapter of Eliphas Levi's Dogma de la Haute Magie. The earliest precedent for this Tau in a hexagram that I have been able to locate is this diagram, which is figure 155 of Crowley's Goetia. Each Tau has the value of 300, and their sum, 600, is also the value for cosmos, world or universe, he theotes, the Godhead, and eupragia, success, among other terms. Note that the ritualist himself stands in the form of a Tau, thus creating a set of 3 crosses in the column, and thus a hierophantic cross. The tripled Tau has the value of 900, the numerical value of the letter Rho, which corresponds to the lineal figure of the hexagram. In addition, 900 is the value of To Zygon, the union, as well as Phoinos, bloody. If you are intrigued by calculations like these, please see my other talk, specifically on the arithmological properties of the star ruby. The ending cross-Kabbalistic is identical to the beginning one, but the ending apotropeism's sign of silence has a somewhat different effect than the one in the opening. Instead of transitioning into the further mechanisms of imagining in the cross-Kabbalistic, the release of the God form of Harpocrates in this second case results in the exciting sensation of being a child suddenly acquiring the gift of a fully developed adult body with all of its physical powers, leaving the magician with mirth and with thanksgiving to do his pleasure on the earth among the legions of the living. Love is the law. Love under will.